All right, hey, welcome to MS201, Lesson 04 on Writing in the Army Style. My name is Captain Silver Beatty, and I'm an APMS with the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be taking you through this lesson today. Now, there's two things here. First, you got that QR code right there on the title slide. If you were to scan that, pull it up on your phone, you're going to get an updated real-time version of this exact same deck, but in a website format. So there's embedded links, there's some outside resources that you can access through that. And another thing with that is that this is being recorded in October of 2024. So depending on when you're actually watching this, there may be some updates to this particular lesson that would be more in accordance with whichever school year you're actually watching this from. So that's number one. Number two, I would encourage you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil. There's going to be some practical exercises we're going to work through with this lesson, because there's a couple concepts that are kind of hard to grasp unless you're doing a lot of practice and reps with those concepts. So I'd recommend getting that piece of paper, pencil out, jot some notes down, or maybe even just have a Word doc open off to the side there, and utilize that to take some notes as we work through this. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention is this is a rough lesson to teach through a computer screen, right? Nobody wants to listen to some random captain in Missoula, Montana, talking about writing in an Army style, right? We already don't like lectures on writing in general, most of us. The last thing we want to do is take it to the Army style of writing, which is even more dry, condensed, and straightforward. So bear with me. There's some incredibly important information regarding writing and putting correspondence together in the Army. But take those notes, take breaks as you need to. Just keep with me through the rest of this lesson. Have that coffee or that energy drink ready. I'm going through this with you, all right? So let's move into our read-aheads and resources. You'll see that this one actually has quite a bit of information embedded into it. So again, if you have that QR code open and you have that link ready, you can actually get to these additional links. So you'll see the read-ahead. It's pretty long, it's pretty dry. Not exactly something I'd want to read in my downtime, but it's available for you with some additional resources. There's also a student handout that you might want to utilize that explains a little bit more in depth some of the information we're going to talk about today. I also have a YouTube screencast that I'm also going to link to this particular video on YouTube. It'll take you into a more in-depth, my version of an email etiquette class that I put together in prior years. Then you've got the link to the email etiquette management slide deck from USAC that came out this year. And of course, an even drier and longer read, you've got Army Regulation AR 25-50. This is going to be your correspondence regulation. It's going to have everything you need to know about writing anything in the Army, along with some picture examples so you can see exactly what your memos and your letters should all look like. So now that you've got those resources available to you, let's do some think about it. Now with this, it's tough to engage you right through a computer screen. I do want you to watch these think about it, pause this video, think about your own reflection with the questions, because we're gonna have a couple of these throughout the entire lesson. So really, to get you engaged, I need you to listen and then reflect and try to come up with responses for all these questions, okay? So number one, have you ever had to write an order or some sort of a document that had to go to an individual or a group? Now, if you have, did you find it difficult or challenging? And why or why not? And then looking at the format that you used, how did you know which one? What format, what style, what type did you use, and how did you know which one to choose? Now, of course, it's pretty obvious how this is going to play into this idea of Army writing, right? So let's talk about what I want you to know by the end of this course, but keep those responses in mind as we move through. By the end of this lesson, what I want you to be able to do is just simply describe the Army writing standards that are in accordance with AR 25-50. I also want you to be able to identify the principles of good writing and explain the 5 steps of the writing process. And at the end, we're going to understand, hopefully, the basics of just email and instant messaging etiquette. Writing in a leader. Why does any of this matter? Well, you've probably taken a lesson from one of your cadre at your program, or you've listened to me talk about the Army Leadership Requirements Model, or the ALRM. Now we know that communicates is listed under that leads competency. It's pretty important, right? Leaders have to be able to convey a clear understanding of whatever they're putting out there. Now with that means effective writing is also an essential competency of leadership, and it's necessary for planning and executing all of your operations. So how does effective writing fall into the ALRM? Well, in both your attributes and your competencies. So in your attributes, it's part of your interpersonal tact. It's how you're able to effectively communicate back and forth with people. And of course, there's some expertise that plays into effective writing. Now your core leader competencies, communicates, we already talked about up top, creating a positive environment and getting results, all of those are part of your effective writing. So you have to be able to do it well and do it to standard to hit multiple attributes and competencies within your ALRM. So keep in mind that all of these competencies of writing in general can be reflected in your own writing and presentation skills in various forms. So, what are the principles of good writing? Why do they matter? Well, the first step in writing in the Army style is to practice these principles that we're going to talk about. They're universal. They apply to any form of professional writing, whether it be for the Army, business, or even there at school. I would assume that you're probably in a couple classes, have been or will be, that require you to write some sort of an essay or write a speech or communicate in discussion boards. Those are all very important, and we're going to talk about the principles that make your writing better that you can put into play in more than just ROTC. So with that being said, why would you think it would be important for you to know how to write effectively as current students and future leaders? Keep your response in mind as we go through these principles of good writing. Now, we're going to talk about just these basic ideas that you should keep in mind, but of course there's additional things that make writing better at any time, right? But here in ROTC and in the Army in general, we want you to keep this page and all of these concepts in your head as you're writing out. So number one, bluff, right? Bottom line up front. Put that recommendation or conclusion or just the reason for your writing, the bottom line, in that first or second paragraph. Don't leave it for the end. Tell your audience what they need to know right up front, the beginning of your message. Now, we also want to use this idea of active voice. Now, active voice can be pretty difficult to decipher from passive voice, especially for those of us that talk in the passive voice on a regular basis. But this is a pretty key principle of having good, effective, concise writing. So with active voice, what happens is the subject does the action. So the subject comes before the verb. So in this instance, the dog chased the cat. Now we want to avoid passive voice in our Army writing, and an example of that would be the cat was chased by the dog. Whoever is doing the action needs to come first. That's how you get to that active voice. You'll notice in those two examples, the active voice is shorter. It has the point of it right up front. There's no confusion on what's happening. The dog chased the cat. So always shoot for that active voice in your writing. Now concise, we're going to keep it to the point. Don't add in fluff sentences. Just keep it concise. Don't fit 15 different ways of saying the same thing into the same paragraph. Organized. Now we want to make sure that message flows well, right? In any message, as we know from communications and reports, all of our Army message have a heading, a body, and a conclusion. So keep it organized in that format and you'll be fine. Writing mechanics are very important. You need to double check your spelling. Some of you need to triple or quadruple check that spelling, as well as your grammar and your punctuation. Now, why is this important? Because this idea of writing and the things that you're going to be doing with writing can actually be that first impression to a future leader, maybe your subordinates. And you don't want your credibility to go out the window just because you missed a period or you spelled something the wrong way. So make sure that you're always double checking that spelling, grammar, and punctuation. If you don't already have Grammarly installed on your computer, I highly recommend you get that. That'll help you a ton. First person writing is another important concept. We use I, you, and we as subjects. We don't use this office, this headquarters, all individuals for most of our types of writing. We truly do want to focus on first person, the I, you, and we in all writing. In clarity, we want to make sure that our message is clear and we can read it in one single rapid reading. Anytime somebody has to read it multiple times to get to the point, it's not clear enough. And then tone, of course, this is pretty much common sense. You need to make sure that you're using a respectful and a professional tone in all of your writing, regardless of who you're sending it to. So there are your main principles of good writing. So we touched a little bit on that active versus passive voice. So these are just some additional examples to give you an idea of what passive versus active looks like. So on the left, you've got passive sentences. On the right, you can see that all of those are shorter, more concise than the left example, and that's taking it from passive to active. So a passive example would be 3 teams were formed by Lieutenant Colonel Jones. Changing that to active voice would say, Lieutenant Colonel Jones formed 3 teams. See how that's shorter, maybe more clear, a little bit more concise. Another passive example, 4 days of leave were requested by Captain Smith. Let's take that to the active side. Captain Smith requested 4 days of leave. Passive, the M4 was fired by Cadet Snuffy. Active, Cadet Snuffy fired her M4. And then last, the car was wrecked by Cadet Johnson. The active example would be Cadet Johnson wrecked his car. Now, I'm going to tell you something that could help you quite a bit, but you have to promise that you'll be responsible with this information. We all know about AI. We all know about ChatGPT and some of the other AI tools that are out there. When I'm trying to make sure that my things are in active voice, I write out my ideas first, I throw it into ChatGPT and say, rewrite this in active voice. If I'm not sure, I can even take a snapshot, right? A couple sentences or a paragraph, put it into ChatGPT and say, is this in the most active voice? Now, I'm not saying to use ChatGPT to write your essays for you. That is 100% not ethical and definitely an integrity violation. But use those AI tools to your advantage. Use them responsibly. Use them to help you understand the difference between passive and active voice. Move on. So let's think about these. Have you ever received some sort of correspondence or a message or a document that was disorganized and just didn't get to the point? I mean, I think we can all say yes to that, right? What did you think when you received that? And what do you think when you get messages that are wordy or lengthy? Because I know for me, in group messages or even just private text messages, if it's like 2 paragraphs long, TLDR, too long, didn't read. It's too much for me. I need it to be short, to the point, organized in the right fashion that makes sense for my brain. And I think a lot of us kind of feel that same way, right? So that's why we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the conciseness and the clarity and the organization of all of our correspondence. So with that, let's talk about the elements of effective writing. There's actually 4 of them. And this is something that you can take not just with ROTC, but you can take this forward in your next essay that you have to write or an academic paper that you have to put together. So these elements are, we're going to start with substance and organization. Substance means that it includes the most important things, right? It is the most important of all of these elements, but includes the important things that really bring your idea together. It includes your controlling idea and all support that goes into that. It's the total concept of what you want to present in your writing. Now keep in mind, a good idea can survive mechanical flaws, grammar issues, punctuation, spelling, but all that stuff, if it's perfect, it can't save your bad ideas. So make sure the substance is there and that it matters and it pertains to the subject at hand. And then your next element, organization, is a huge pet peeve of mine. This is defined as the pattern that you use to present your idea and the support that goes with it. Now there's no single way to do it, but there are ways that make more sense than others. So you need to decide which organizational pattern best communicates your ideas to the audience in a way that will make sense for them. Because, keep in mind, poor organization can completely obscure or destroy your good ideas. I can tell you, if I'm reading something that's not organized and it's making me jump from thought to thought to thought, and I can't stay on track with my own thoughts, your good idea is completely lost. I'm not going to be able to stick with it. So that's on substance and organization. We also have style and correctness. Now, style, everybody has their own style when it comes to writing. This is defined as how you present your material. It includes your formats, your vocabulary, and the packaging of it as a whole. Now, that's a whole separate topic on packaging that we could talk about, but I want you to just kind of think about, how do you talk? What kind of vocabulary do you use? Does it make sense for the subject, and it doesn't make sense for the audience that's reading it? And of course, correctness. This is going to be a huge, huge pet peeve for a lot of your professors and a lot of your leaders going forward. This is what most people think of when you ask them to describe good writing, that it's written well, that it's correct. And it includes your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation, and other mechanical devices that go into your writing in general. Keep in mind that errors can really distract a reader from the ideas on the paper. So it's important that you pay attention, you have that attention to detail, that you correct the mistakes in there, read through it a couple times, even read it out loud to see if it makes sense, but make sure that it is correct to avoid the embarrassment of losing your credibility or being called out for missing a semicolon or a comma where it should have been, or the worst, an apostrophe in your, using the wrong ones. Now you see there, for my students, I do advise them and recommend that they always use the Writing Center on campus. Your Writing Center on your campus is an invaluable resource. You should use it in any class and for any project that involves writing. So I highly recommend and encourage you to look up your campus's Writing Center, see if you can make an appointment online, if you can just send things. I know ours at University of Montana, you can just send them a draft and do a virtual appointment. They'll read over your draft or your project, they'll give you some feedback, and you go back and make your own edits. But it's a free and invaluable resource that you likely already pay for with your student fees anyway, so you might as well get your money's worth. All right, let's move on to the steps of the writing process. So like I said, there's 5 steps, right? The first thing we have to do before we write anything is we have to do some research. We have to gather ideas and our supporting information that goes into those ideas. It's pretty basic, right? Then we need to make a plan. We need to figure out and make an outline of some sort and how we're going to organize our information. Then you're going to develop a draft. That's when you pull everything together and you throw it into sentences and paragraphs and just see what sticks. You're throwing it all in there. Then you're going to do some revisions. Maybe have somebody read it over. Maybe have your Writing Center do some edits or formatting stuff for you. You're going to revise it and improve the coherence, the efficiency, and the style of your writing. And then finally, you're going to do a proof. This is where you're focusing on your correctness. So in revising, you're focusing on coherence, efficiency, and style. In your final proof, you're focusing on the correctness overall, so your writing mechanics, the grammar, punctuation, spelling, your citations, documentation, and your formatting as a whole. So those are your 5 steps of the writing process. Now, I know for me, I really struggle with not editing as I go. I really struggle with the idea of drafts. I'm not usually very good at even creating outlines before I just jump right into it. As I've learned over time, especially through my own undergraduate and graduate programs, this does save you a lot of time to actually take it and create that plan, then a draft, then a revised draft, and a proof. Because if you're just editing as you go, you're going to make a million other changes. So I highly recommend you start following these steps if you don't already. Research, plan, develop your draft, revise that draft, and then do a final proof before submission. So, what do you think? When you look at all these standards or these thoughts or anything that goes into effective writing, what are the most important to you? Maybe think about the steps of the writing process. Which one of those is most important? And now if you've done some time here in college, you've had to write some sort of paper or essay, what have you noticed from what you've learned just now are some similarities and differences between preparing papers for college that you've done in the past and preparing Army documents going forward. Now, the responses might vary on this, right? Because some of you might be in creative writing classes, some of you might be in news broadcast journalism where you stick to the facts and you don't put any opinions. It's really going to be very dependent on what type of papers you've written. Sometimes you have certain minimum page requirements that you have to meet, so there might be a little additional fluff and not as concise writing as you would expect in Army documents. So understand that there could be a difference, but in Army writing specifically, we are looking for those elements of writing and the specific standards that are important characteristics of good, effective communication. All right, so now when it comes to Army writing, right now we're going to talk about 3 major types of written communications, but we're really going to focus on one in general. So our written communications in the Army, we've got memorandums, your operations orders or op-ords, and endorsements. Now, the types of orders and writing op-ords, those are covered in completely different lessons. That's not a today problem. Really, what we're going to focus on is that memorandum. So, when there's different types of memorandums here. They are the formal, informal, and then of course special purpose memorandums. So when we talk about formal, these are external to the headquarters, the command, installation, or even the DoD. These go outside of the organization. They're usually encompassing personnel actions or appreciations and commendations. And those are formal. We also have the informal. Now those are internal to our HQ, our command, installation, or the Department of Defense. So stay within the organization. We also have special purpose memorandums, which you've probably seen quite a few of. We have memorandums of agreement, memorandums of understanding, memorandums for record. All of those are just special purpose ones that either meant to use as a paper trail, meant to put a policy out, meant to just have kind of a contract of understanding or agreement between 2 separate organizations. They're really dependent. You can dive into 25-50 if you really want to understand when and how to use those. But it's important that you just understand the 3 types of memorandums that we have: formals, informals, and special purpose. All in all, memos are going to be either your best friend or your worst enemy. But you have to understand that they run the Army. I write multiple a week in general. So you've got to become a pro at writing and reading them and understanding the correct format. Like I said, 25-50 has photos. They have actual picture examples, so you really can't mess it up. So what do you think with this? When it comes to our writing skills, how do poor writing skills reflect on the soldier or even a leader? And what can you do about subordinates or even your own peers who write poorly? What do you think you could do if your own leader or other leaders demonstrate poor writing skills? Would you confront it? Would you correct it? Would you utilize that time to develop them, or would you just kind of stand by and let it happen? Now, if we know that poor writing skills likely reflect poorly on a soldier or leader, I would hope that your response would be that you'd want to step in and maybe help develop. Now, how you do that and how you go about it is going to be very different between subordinates and peers and your own leadership, right? There is a tactful and proper way to do it, several different ways. I've heard everything in my classes from just ripping off the Band-Aid and saying, "Ma'am, sir, this is not written well," or "Ma'am, sir, would you like me to start reviewing your memos before you send them out?" There's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. Just kind of consider that and understand that it's likely something you might have to do in your career at some point. Now let's think about this. Before we move into emails and instant messaging, when we're writing an email, do you have to follow the ordinary rules of the Army style of writing? Well, yes, with some basic changes, but absolutely, we still have the same rules for the most part between Army styles of just written, documented, printed papers and our own emails and other technological ways of messaging each other. So let's talk this guide for writing emails. Look, in today's world, the vast majority of our actual written communication is done through email, which can be a great tool. It gives us the chance to share information with many people at one time. Unfortunately, over time, it has led to a lot of sloppy writing habits that oftentimes create confusion and are sometimes translated over into written documents that probably shouldn't look sloppy at all. So let's talk about some rules for email etiquette. So just like we've learned from our other communications classes that you've had in the past or will have in the near future, we know that we work with the idea of the message being heading, body, conclusion. And it's a lot like how this is set up here. So the first thing we want to do is clarify the purpose of the email. Remember, bottom line up front. So with our emails, we need to make sure that we have a subject line that might be the first sentence of the email or something along the lines of the first sentence that really tells the audience or the reader what this email means. What is it good for? What does it entail? And then when you're actually writing the body of this message, you're still going to follow that Army style of writing rules. You're going to have correct spelling, grammar, punctuation. You're going to keep the point of clarity. You're going to do the bluff, right? You're going to keep to the point. You're going to use short words and sentences. Now, I have that little star off to the side. Make sure you read through it before you hit send. One of the worst things you can do is send something off, and as it's processing and sending, you catch that typo. Like the time that a cadet referred to me as mama instead of ma'am in an email. I bet you they wish they had read that first before they hit send. And the last thing on that closing, we're going to use a complete signature block. So you can actually see mine right there. Captain Silver Beatty, Assistant Professor of Military Science, University of Montana, and our address. Now we do want to avoid using just first names for two reasons. One, you got to be careful with that because of the nature of the hierarchy of our organization. But two, first names, some of them can be pretty common. And the last thing you want to do is get confusing stuff. So keep your first and last name in your signature block so that people aren't trying to figure out which John or which Jennifer they're writing to or writing back to. Now we've got some USAC rules for our email etiquette as a whole. So there's 15 of them here. We'll go pretty quick here. We want you to use actionable and descriptive subject lines. I'll show you a version of that in a moment. And then we want you to briefly introduce yourself. That should be part of the very beginning of it if it's necessary of your email. Keep your email brief. Never mix, never worry. You don't have to worry about mixing things up altogether. Only discuss public matters. If it's a private situation, it shouldn't be out in the email. It should be discussed behind closed doors and not in a way that could be caught up or seen or pulled up or hacked into by somebody else. Make it easy to respond and be clear in your own responses. Now, we do say that return emails within 24 hours if possible. Shoot for 2 hours if you can. That's the necessary etiquette. It's the correct etiquette. Of course, you also have to understand your work-life balance and weekends and things like that to play into place. Now, a reminder never hurts. It's okay to remind somebody that you sent an email or put a reminder on for yourself to check emails. When it comes to Army-to-Army emails, let's limit emojis and avoid word shortcuts. Don't ever email angry. It's never going to come out right. Stop shouting. We don't use all caps unless we're writing in acronyms. And we don't need a million exclamation points either. Be very considerate about what you write. Think about it through before you type it out, and especially before you hit send. Beware of the dreaded reply all trap that will end up, you do not want to be the person on the Army WTF moments page that has hit reply all to something that goes to 80,000 separate email inboxes. Be careful about the reply all. Be careful about who you're actually replying to and who's on the to and the CC and even your BCC line. And then of course, use your courtesy and attachments and make sure that you've actually attached the document when you say, please see attached. Now, how I define all these, I like to say use the inform, request, or urgent at the beginning of your subject lines. That means it's right front and center to your audience, your reader. Whether you need something, you're just letting them know something, or if this needs to be handled right away. Tell me who you are and why it matters. Keep it brief. Keep your bluff in the first few sentences. Please use bullet formatting for any kind of lists or tasking so that I don't have to read through narratives. Like, people are busy, so tell me how soon you need a response. And remember that need and want are very different things. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Only return emails during your business hours. 1, for your own sanity, and 2, you don't want to make somebody feel obligated to respond back to you after business hours either. Organize your inbox and flag important messages. This is something I do on a pretty regular basis. Don't use those emojis or any kind of weird jargon. Keep your emotions out of your emails. Be very cognizant of your punctuation. Remember that once you hit send, it's out there forever. Don't gossip via email. Actually, don't ever do it, period. But definitely don't do it during email. And then know your audience and choose your language accordingly. This is my translation of the USAC email etiquette. Take what you will from all of that. Then, of course, in today's age, we have things like Microsoft Teams, other ways that we instant message, maybe even consider this for text messaging. Only IM people or instant message people that you actually know personally. Otherwise, use email when necessary. Check the receiver's online status before you send something. 1, so you know if they're even around and it's worth your time. And 2, so that you know when to expect a response. Introduce yourself if you need to. Use a greeting when necessary. Be mindful of the reader and their time. Use that same email writing, etiquette, and management concepts that you've learned prior. Keep it short. It's an instant message. Be careful of your abbreviations. Make sure that they're understandable. Don't ever send bad news via instant message. Use a phone call or an in-person meeting for that. Just don't do that. Don't ever change meeting times or venues in an instant message. Use email because some people that are on like Microsoft Teams don't have the chat on their phone maybe. If they're away from their desk, they're not going to find out that something got changed. So use email. Most of us have our email tied to our phone, so we get that update. And then always end conversations with a short closing to make it clear that the conversation's over. Those are pretty basic standard rules. So let's talk a little bit about that active voice again. We're going to bring it back around, do some practical exercises, and close this out. Why is writing in that active voice more effective than writing in the passive voice? Well, unfortunately, a lot of us overuse that passive voice because it's how we talk naturally. But then that creates sentences that are indirect, maybe unfocused, and it slows communication down. So the passive voice kind of hides the doer of the action, which blocks communication altogether. Whereas the active voice is direct, natural, and forceful. The active voice actually makes sentences clearer and shorter, and eliminating that passive voice actually reduces a piece of writing by about 20%. Now, for those of you that have to write a minimum amount of words for an essay, that might not make you very happy. But for some of us that have to read a lot of Army writing on a regular basis, let's keep it to active voice so that I don't have to spend too much time reading through it. Okay, so let's move into this practical exercise. So there's going to be separate parts of this. I hope that you take this very seriously. Like, legitimately try these because changing things from active to passive can be pretty tough. But this is pretty simple, pretty easy. We're going to take a few minutes. In part 1, I want you to take some time to review these following 5 statements. And on a sheet of paper or even on your Word doc, just decide 1 through 5 if it's written in alpha, active voice, or papa, passive voice. Let's go ahead and pause the video here, read through those, and make those decisions. All right, so here's some answers, right? I'm not going to always give the answers, but I'll give some this time. So number 1 is passive, right? Brand new equipment was issued to the team. Number 2, First Lieutenant Smith was counseled by Captain Drew. It's passive. The platoon leader is assisted by the platoon sergeant. Passive. Captain Webb read the op order. Active. And Specialist Jarrett dug a trench. Also active. The subject is doing the action, and the subject comes before that action. So now for part 2, I just want you to take these 3 sentences that we decided were passive and take a minute to rewrite them. There's multiple ways you could do that, but just pause it here and rewrite those sentences in active voice. All right, so here are your answers. These are just some examples of how you could have rewritten it. Instead of brand new equipment was issued to the team received brand new equipment. Instead of First Lieutenant Smith was counseled by Captain Drew, we now have Captain Drew counseled First Lieutenant Smith. And instead of the platoon leader was assisted by the platoon sergeant, now we just have the platoon sergeant assisted the platoon leader. Pretty simple, down and dirty. These are very simple examples. I encourage you to keep practicing with more and more difficult sentences and see if you can rework those yourselves. All right, so think about this. Given all of this information, everything that you've just sat through for the last 35 minutes, how will knowing the Army writing style and those steps enable you to better prepare, deliver, and get the point to your audience? You're able to come up with something like that. And I also hope, now that we're closing out, you are more confident in describing those Army writing standards that are in accordance with AR 25-50, that you're able to identify those principles of good and effective writing, that you could explain the 5 steps of that writing process, and that you understand kind of the foundations and the very basic pieces when it comes to email and instant messaging etiquette. So as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to your primary advisor or your instructor. Maybe find a high-speed MS3 or MS4 that could explain some of this more with you. I do encourage you, keep practicing, keep working especially on that active versus passive voice. Utilize your writing center right there on campus for additional writing assignments that you may have, whether it's ROTC or outside resource classes. And if you still can't get questions answered or you have additional deeper questions, use the comments of this video or reach out to me. I may still be in ROTC when you're reading this, so just be patient. My email is silver.beaty, B-E-A-T-Y, @mso.umt.edu. Thanks for bearing with me through a pretty tough lecture on Army writing, and I'll see you on the next one.